Chapter 1 of the Castle Court Diamond Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Castle Court Diamond Mystery by Geraldine Bonner. Statement of Sophie Jeffers, Lady's Maid to the Marchioness of Castlecourt. I had been in Lady Castle's court service 2 years when the Castlecourt diamonds were stolen. I'm not going to give an account of how I was suspected and cleared. That's not the part of the story I'm here to set down. It's about the disappearance of the diamonds that I'm to tell, and I'm ready to do it to the best of my ability. We were in London, at Burridge's Hotel, for the season. Lord Castlecourt's townhouse at Grosvenor Gate was let to some rich Americans, and for 2 years now we had stayed at Burridge's. It was the 3rd of April when we came to town. My lord, my lady, Chalmers, my lord's man, and myself. The children had been sent to my lord's aunt, Lady Mary Cranberry, she who's unmarried, and lives at Cranberry Castle, near Worcester. Lord Castlecourt didn't like going to the hotel at all. Chalmers used to tell me how he talked sometimes. Chalmers has been with my lord 10 years, and was born on the estate of Castlecourt Marsh Manor. But my lord generally did what my lady wanted, and she was not at all partial to the country. She'd say to me, she was always full of her jokes, "Yes, it's an excellent place, the country, an excellent place to get away from, Jeffers, and the farther away you get, the more excellent it seems." My lady had been born in Ireland, and lived there till she was a woman grown. It's not for me to comment on my betters, but I've heard it said she didn't have a decent frock to her back till old Lady Bundy took her up and brought her to London. Her father was a clergyman, the Reverend McCarran Duffy, of County Clare, and they do say he hadn't a penny to his fortune, and that my lady ran wild in cotton frocks and with holes in her stockings, till Lady Bundy saw her. I've heard tell that Lady Bundy said of her that she'd be the most beautiful woman in London since the Gunnings, whoever they were, and just brought her up to town and fitted her out from top to toe. In a month she was the talk of the season, and before it was over she was betrothed to the Marquis of Castlecourt, who was a great match for her. But she was the beggar on horseback you hear people talk about. Lord Castlecourt wasn't what would be called a millionaire, but he gave her more in a month than she'd had before in 5 years, and she'd spent it all and want more. It seemed as if she didn't know the value of money. If she'd see a pretty thing in a shop, she'd buy it, and if she had not got the ready money, they'd give her the credit. For, being the Marchioness of Castlecourt, all the shop people were on their knees to her. They were that anxious to get her patronage. Then, when the bills would come in, she would be quite surprised and wonder how she had come to spend so much, and hide them from Lord Castlecourt. Afterward she'd forget all about them, even where she'd put them. Lord Castlecourt was so fond of her he'd have forgiven her anything. They'd been married 5 years when I entered my lady's service, and he was as much in love with her as if he'd been married but a month. And I don't blame him. She was the prettiest lady, and the most coaxing I ever laid eyes on. She might well be Irish. There was blarney on her tongue for all the world, and money ready to drop off the ends of her fingers into any palm that was held out. There was no story of misfortune but would bring the tears to her eyes, and her purse to her hand. Generous and soft-hearted she was to every creature that walked. No one could be angry with her long. I've seen Lord Castlecourt begin to scold her, and end by laughing at her and kissing her. Not but what she respected him and loved him. She did both, and she was afraid of him too. No one knew better than my lady when it was time to stop trifling with my lord and be serious. It was Lord Castlecourt's custom to go to Paris 2 or 3 times every year. He had a sister married there of whom he was very fond, and he and her husband would go off shooting boars to a place with a name I can't remember. My lady was always happy to go to Paris. She'd say she loved it, and the theatres and the shops, though what she could see in it I never understood. A dirty, messy city, and full of men ready to ogle an honest Christian woman, as if she was what half the women look like that go prancing along the streets. My lady spent a good deal of her time at the dressmaker's, and she and I were forever going up to top stories in little silly lifts that go up of themselves. I'd a great deal rather have walked than trusted myself to such unsafe French contrivances. Underhand, dangerous things that might burst at any moment, I say. The year before the time I am writing of, we went to Paris, as usual, in March. We stopped at the Bristol and stayed 1 month. My lady went out a great deal, and between whiles was, as usual, at what they call their couturières, at the jewelers, or the shops on the Rue de la Paix. She also bought from Bolkonsky, the furrier, a very smart jacket of Russian sable that I'll be bound cost a pretty penny. When we went back to London for the season, her beauty and her costumes were the talk of the town. Old Lady Bundy's maid told me that Lady Bundy went about saying, "And but for me, she'd be the mother of the red-headed larrikins of an Irish squireen," which didn't seem to me nice talk for a lady. We spent that summer at Castle Court Marsh Manor very quietly, as was my lord's wish. My lady did not seem in as good spirits as usual, which I set down to the country life that she always said bored her. Once or twice she told me that she felt ill, which I'd never known her to say before, and, one day in the late summer, I discovered her in tears. She did not seem to be herself again till we went to Paris in September. Then she brightened up and was soon in higher spirits than ever. She was on the go continually, often would go out for lunch, and not be back till it was time to dress for dinner. She enjoyed herself in Paris very much, she told me, and I think she did, for I never saw her more animated, almost excited with high spirits and success. The following spring we left Castle Court Marsh Manor, and, as I said before, came to Burrage's on April the 3rd. The season was soon in full swing, and my lady was going out morning, noon, and night. There was no end to it, and I was worn out. When she was away in the afternoon, I'd take 40 winks on the sofa, and have Sarah Dwight, the housemaid of our rooms, bring me a cup of tea, when she'd sometimes take one herself, and we'd gossip a bit over it. If I'd known what an important person Sarah Dwight was going to turn out, I'd have taken more notice of her. But, unfortunately, thieves don't have a mark on their brow like Cain, and Sarah was the last girl anyone would have suspected was dishonest. All that I ever thought about her was that she was a neat, civil-spoken girl who knew her betters and her elders when she saw them. She was quick on her feet, modest and well-mannered, not what you'd call good-looking, too pale and small for my taste, and Chalmers quite agreed with me. The one thing I noticed about her were her hands, which were white and fine like a lady's. Once, when I asked her how she kept them so well, she laughed and said, not having a pretty face, she tried to have pretty hands. "Because a girl ought to have something pretty about her, oughtn't she, Miss Jeffers?" she said to me, quiet and respectful as could be. I answered, as I thought it was my duty, that beauty was only skin deep, and if your character was honest, your face would take care of itself. She looked down at her hands, and smiled a little, and said, "Yes, I suppose that's true, Miss Jeffers. I'll try to remember it. It's what every girl ought to feel, I'm sure." Sarah Dwight had the greatest admiration for Lady Castlecourt. She'd managed to be standing about in doorways and on the stairs when my lady passed down to go to dinner and to the opera. Then she'd come back and tell me how beautiful my lady was, and how she envied me being her maid. While she was talking she'd help me tidy up the room, and sometimes, because she admired my lady so, I'd let her look at the new clothes from Paris as they hung in the wardrobe. Sarah would gape with admiration over them. She spoke a little about my lady's jewels, but not much. I'd have suspected that. It was in the 5th week after we came to town, to be exact on the afternoon of the 4th day of May, that the diamonds were stolen. As I'd been so badgered and questioned and tormented about it, I've got it all as clear in my head as a photograph, just how it was and just what time everything happened. That evening, my lady was going to dinner at the Duke of Duxbury's. It was to be a great dinner, a prince and a prime minister, and I don't know what all besides. My lady was to wear a new gown from Paris and the diamonds. She told me, when she went out, what she would want and when she would be back. That was at 4, and I was not to expect her in till after 6. Some time before that, I got her things ready, the gown laid out, and the diamonds on the dressing table. They were kept in a leather case of their own, and then put in a dispatch box that shut with a patent lock. When we traveled, I always carried this box. That is, when my lady used it. A good deal of the time it was at the banker's. Lord Castlecourt was very choice about the diamonds. Some of them had been in his family for generations. The way they were set now, in a necklace with pendants, the larger stones surrounded by smaller ones, had been a new setting made for his mother. My lady wanted them changed, and I remember that Lord Castlecourt was vexed with her, and she couldn't pet and coax him back into a good humor for some days. One of the last things that I did that afternoon, while arranging the dressing table, was to open the dispatch box and take the leather case out. Though it was May and the evenings were very long, I turned on the electric lights and, unclasping the case, looked at the necklace. I was standing this way when Chalmers comes to the side door of the room. The whole suite was connected with doors, and asked me if I could remember the number of the bootmakers where my lady bought her riding boots. Some friend of Chalmers wanted to know the address. I couldn't at first remember it, and I was standing this way, trying to recollect, when I heard the clock strike 6. I told Chalmers I'd get it for him. I was certain it was in my lady's desk, and I put the case down on the bureau, and Chalmers and I together went into the sitting room. The door opened between us and my lady's room, and looked for it. We found it in a minute, and Chalmers was writing it down in his pocketbook when I thought I heard, so light and soft you could hardly say you heard anything, a rustle like a woman's skirt in the next room. For a second I thought it was my lady, and I jumped, for I'd no business at her desk, and I knew she'd be vexed and scold me. Chalmers didn't hear a thing, and looked at me astonished. Then I ran to the door and peeped in. There was no one there, and I thought, of course, I'd been mistaken. We didn't leave the room directly, but stood by the desk talking for a bit. When I told this to the detectives, one of the papers said it showed how deceptive even the best servants were. As if a valet and a lady's maid couldn't stop for a moment of talk! Poor things! We work hard enough most of the time, I'm sure, and that we weren't long standing there idle can be seen from the fact that I heard 6:30 strike. I was for urging Chalmers to go then, as Lady Castlecourt might be in at any moment, but he hung about, following me into my lady's room, helping me draw the curtains and turn on all the lights, for my lady can't bear to dress by daylight. It was nearly 7 o'clock when we heard the sound of her skirts in the passage. Chalmers slipped off into his master's rooms, shutting the door quietly behind him. My lady was looking very beautiful. She had on a blue hat, trimmed with blue and gray hydrangeas, and underneath it her hair was like spun gold, and her eyes looked soft and dark. It never seemed to tire her to be always on the go, but I thought lately she had been going too much, for sometimes she was pale, and once or twice I thought she was out of spirits, the way she'd been in the country last summer. She seemed so tonight, not talking as much as usual. There were some letters for her on the corner of the dressing table, and I could see her face in the glass as she read them. One made her smile, and then she sat thinking and biting her lip, which was as red as a cherry. She seemed to me to be preoccupied. When I was making the side ondulations of her hair, which everybody knows is a most critical operation, she jerked her head and said suddenly she wondered how the children were. I never before knew my lady to think about the children when her hair was being attended to. She was sitting in front of the dressing table, her toilette complete, when she stretched out her hand to the leather case of the diamonds. I was looking at the reflection in the mirror, thinking that she was as perfect as I could make her. She, too, had been looking at the back of her head, and still held the small glass in one hand. The other she reached out for the diamonds. The case had a catch that you had to press, and I saw, to my surprise, that she raised the lid without pressing this. Then she gave a loud exclamation. There were no diamonds there! She turned round and looked at me and said, "How odd! Where are they, Jeffers?" I felt suddenly as if I was going to fall dead, and afterward, when my lady stood by me and said it was nonsense to suspect me, one of the things she brought up as a proof of my innocence was the color I turned, and the way I looked at that moment. "Jeffers!" she said, suddenly rising up quick out of her chair. And then, without my saying a word, she went white and stood staring at me. My lady, was all I could falter out. I don't know. Where are they, Jeffers? What's happened to them?" My voice was all husky like a person's with a cold, and I stammered, "They were in the case an hour ago." My lady caught me by the arm, and her fingers gripped tight into my flesh. "Don't say they're stolen, Jeffers," she cried out. "Don't tell me that. Lord Castlecourt would never forgive me. He'll never forgive me. They're worth thousands and thousands of pounds. They can't have been stolen." She spoke so loud they heard her in the next room, and Lord Castlecourt came in. He was a tall gentleman, a little bald, and I can see him now in his black clothes, with the white of his shirt bosom gleaming, standing in the doorway looking at her. He had a surprised expression on his face, and was frowning a little, for he hated anything like loud talking or a scene. "What's the matter, Gladys?" he said. "You're making such a noise, I heard you in my room. Is there a fire?" She made a sort of grasp at the case, and tried to hide it. Chalmers was in the doorway behind my lord, and I saw him staring at her and trying not to. He told me afterwards she was as white as paper. "The diamonds," she faltered out. "Your diamonds. Your family's. Your mother's." Lord Castlecourt gave a start, and seemed to stiffen. He did not move from where he was, but stood rigid, looking at her. "What's the matter with them?" he said, quick and quiet, but not as if he was calm. She threw the case she had been trying to hide on the dressing table. It knocked over some bottles, and lay there open and empty. My lord sprang at it, took it up, and shook it. "Gone?" he said, turning to my lady. "Stolen, do you mean?" Yes, she said, like that, 3 times, and then she fell back in the chair and put her hands over her face. Lord Castlecourt turned to me. "What's this mean, Jeffers? You've had charge of the diamonds." I told him all I knew, and as well as I could, what with my legs trembling that they'd scarce support me, and my tongue dry as a piece of leather. When I got toward the end, my lady interrupted me, crying out, "Herbert, it isn't my fault, it isn't! Jeffers would tell you I've taken good care of them. I've not been careless or forgetful about them, as I have about other things. I have been careful of them. It isn't my fault, and you mustn't blame me." Lord Castlecourt made a sort of gesture toward her to be still. I could see it meant that. He kept the case, and, going to the door, locked it. "How long have you been in these rooms?" he said, turning round on me with the key in his hand. I told him, trembling, and almost crying. I had never seen my lord look so terribly stern. I don't know whether he was angry or not, but I was afraid of him, and it was for the first time, for he'd always been a kind and generous master to me and the other servants. "Oh, my lord," I said, feeling suddenly weighed down with dread and misery, "you surely don't think I took them?" "I'm not thinking anything," he said. "You and Chalmers are to stay in this room, and not move from it till you get my orders. I'll send at once for the police." My lady turned round in her chair and looked at him. "The police?" she said. "Oh, Herbert, wait till tomorrow. You're not even sure yet that they are stolen." "Where are they, then?" he says, quick and sharp. "Jeffers says she saw them in that case an hour ago. They are not in the case now. Do either you or she know where they are?" I was down on my knees, picking up the bottles that had been knocked over by the empty jewel case. "Not I, God knows," I said, and I began to cry. "The matter must be put in the hands of the police at once," my lord said. "I'll have the hotel policeman here in a few minutes, and the rooms searched. Jeffers and Chalmers and their luggage will be searched tomorrow." My lady gave a sort of gasp. I was close to her feet, and I heard her. But, for myself, I just broke down, and kneeling on the floor with the overturned bottle spilling cologne all around me, cried worse than I've done since I was in short frocks. "Oh, my lady, I didn't take them! I didn't! You know I didn't!" I sobbed out. My lady looked very miserable. "My poor Jeffers," she said, and put her hand on my shoulder. "I'm sure you didn't. If I'd only a sixpence in the world, I'd stake that on your honesty." Lord Castlecourt didn't say anything. He went to the bell and pressed it. When the boy answered it, he gave him a message in a low tone, and it didn't seem 5 minutes before 2 men were in the room. I did not know, till afterward, that one was the manager, and the other the hotel policeman. I stopped my crying the best I could, and heard my lord telling them that the diamonds were gone, and that Chalmers and I had been the only people in the room all the afternoon. Then he said he wanted them to communicate at once with Scotland Yard, and have a capable detective sent to the hotel. "Lady Castlecourt and I are going to dinner," he said, looking at his watch. "We will have to leave, at the latest, within the next 20 minutes. Lady Castlecourt cried out at that. "Herbert, I don't see how I can go to that dinner. I am altogether too upset, and, besides, it will be too late. It's 8 o'clock now." "We can make the time up in the carriage," my lord said, and he went into the next room with a policeman, where they talked together in low voices. I helped my lady on with her cloak, and she stood waiting, her eyebrows drawn together, looking very pale and worried. When my lord came back he said nothing, only nodded to my lady that he was ready, and, without a word, they left the room. I tried to tidy the bureau and pick up the bottles as well as I could, and every time I looked at the door into the sitting room, I saw that policeman's head peering round the doorpost at me. That was an awful night. I did not know it till afterward, but both Chalmers and I were under what they called surveillance. I did not know either that Lord Castlecourt had told the policeman he believed us to be innocent, that we were of excellent character, and nothing but positive proof would make him think either of us guilty. All I felt, as I tossed about in bed, was that I was suspected, and would be arrested, and probably put in jail. 15 years of honest service in noble families wouldn't help me much if the detectives took it into their heads I was guilty. The next morning we heard about the disappearance of Sarah Dwight, and things began to look brighter. Sarah had left the hotel at a little after 7 the evening before, speaking to no one, and carrying a small portmanteau. When they came to examine her room and her box, they found a jacket and skirt hanging on the wall, some burnt papers in the grate, and the box almost empty, except for some cheap cotton underclothes and a dirty wadded quilt put in to fill up. Sarah had given no notice, and had not at any time told any of her fellow servants that she was dissatisfied with her place, or wanted to leave. That morning Mr. Brisson, the Scotland Yard detective, had us up in the sitting room asking us questions till I was fair muddled, and didn't know truth from lies. Lord Castlecourt and my lady were both present, and Mr. Brisson was forever politely asking my lady questions, till she got quite angry with him, and said she wasn't at all sure the diamonds were stolen. They might have been mislaid, and would turn up somewhere. Mr. Brisson was surprised, and asked my lady if she had any idea where they were liable to turn up. And my lady looked annoyed, and said it was a silly question, and that she wasn't a clairvoyant. 3 days after this, Mr. Johnny Gilsey, who is a detective, and, I have heard since, a very famous gentleman, was engaged by Lord Castlecourt to work upon the case. Mr. Gilsey was very soft-spoken and pleasant. He did not muddle you as Mr. Brisson did, and it was very easy to tell him all you knew or could remember, which he always seemed anxious to hear. He had me up in the sitting room twice, once alone and once with Mr. Brisson, and they asked me a host of questions about Sarah Dwight. I told them all I could think of, and when I came to her hands, and how they were white and fine like a lady's, I saw Mr. Brisson look at Mr. Gilsey and raise his eyebrows. "Does it seem to you," he says, scribbling words in his notebook, "that this sounds like Laura the lady?" And Mr. Gilsey answered, "The manner of operating sounds like her, I must admit." "She was in Chicago when last heard of," said Mr. Brisson, stopping in his scribbling. "But we've information within the last week that she's left there." "Laura the lady is in London," Mr. Gilsey remarked, looking at his fingernails. "I saw her 3 weeks ago at Earl's Court." Mr. Brisson got red in the face and puffed out his lips, as if he was going to say something, but decided not to. He scribbled some more, and then, looking at what he had written as if he was reading it over, says, "If that's the case, there is very little doubt as to who planned and executed this robbery." "That's a very comfortable state of affairs to arrive at," says Mr. Gilsey, "and I hope it's the correct one." And that was all he said, that time, about what he thought. After this we stayed on at Burrage's for the rest of the season, but it was not half as cheerful or gay as it had been before. My lord was often moody and cross, for he felt the loss of the diamonds bitterly, and my lady was out of spirits and moped, for she was very fond of him, and to have him take it this way seemed to upset her. Mr. Brisson or Mr. Gilsey were constantly popping in and murmuring in the sitting room, but they got no further on. At least, there was no talk of finding the diamonds, which was all that counted. This is all I know of the theft of the necklace. What happened at that time, and what Mr. Gilsey calls the surrounding circumstances of the case, I have tried to put down as clearly and as simply as possible. I have gone over them so often, and been forced to be so careful, that I think they will be found to be quite correct in every particular. End of Chapter 1. Read by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona, April 17, 2021.